If you have been following global events recently, you may have noticed a significant shift. The United States is no longer acting solely from behind the scenes, but is taking a more direct and visible role alongside Israel in confronting Iran. And this change raises an important question: is there simply a sudden escalation of geopolitical tension, or is it the result of deeper structural forces that have been building over decades? At first glance, the explanation seems straightforward. Concerns over Iran's nuclear ambitions, its regional influence, and perceived threats to US allies. But when we extend the timeline and look beyond immediate triggers, a much more complex picture begins to emerge. The roots of this tension can be traced back to the Egyptian Iranian coup d'etat, when the United States intervened in Iran's internal politics. And later, the Iranian Revolution fundamentally reshaped the country's orientation, turning it into a state that operates largely outside the US-led global system. In a world structured around alliances, rules, and financial networks, such an independent and unpredictable actor naturally becomes a source of long-term strategic tension, which explains why US-Iran relations have remained adversarial for decades without fully escalating into total war. This is not a temporary conflict, but a sustained structural rivalry. The next layer involves geography and energy. Iran's proximity to the Strait of Hormuz gives it influence over a critical artery of global energy supply. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through this narrow passage, meaning that instability in this region has immediate global economic consequences, and, importantly, markets react not only to actual supply disruptions, but to perceived risks, which is why oil prices often surge even before any physical shortage occurs. The United States' long-standing military presence in the region can therefore be understood as an effort to manage this risk. Yet Iran's capacity to disrupt or threaten this flow ensures that tension remains structurally embedded. Beyond energy lies an even deeper layer: the financial system, particularly the petrodollar system, which links global energy demand to demand for the US dollar. As long as oil is traded in dollars, countries must hold and use the currency, reinforcing its global dominance. However, Iran has at times sought to bypass this system, and while limited in scale, such actions carry symbolic and strategic weight because, if replicated widely, they could gradually erode the foundations of dollar centrality. Another layer involves debt and capital flows. The United States operates with a historically high level of sovereign debt, and sustaining this system depends heavily on global confidence in dollar-denominated assets. During periods of geopolitical instability, capital often flows toward the US as a perceived safe haven, strengthening the dollar's position. This does not mean conflicts are created to reduce debt, but rather that in a high-debt environment, maintaining the centrality of the financial system becomes even more critical, and challenges to that system are taken seriously. Finally, there is the dimension of alliances and regional order. The US presence in the Middle East is not solely about energy, but also about maintaining a balance of power and ensuring the security of key partners such as Israel. Iran's support for opposing forces in the region further intensifies this rivalry, making it both persistent and expansive. When all these layers are considered together, historical grievances, geographic leverage, energy dynamics, financial structures, and alliance commitments, the current escalation appears less like an isolated event and more like the release of accumulated pressure within a complex system. In this sense, the US decision to take a more direct role is not simply a reaction, but the outcome of multiple overlapping strategic imperatives. It is neither purely accidental nor entirely predetermined, but rather the result of structural forces reaching a critical point. And perhaps the most important question is not why this conflict is happening now, but whether it represents a breakdown of the system or the system functioning under stress. Because if a single region can influence energy markets, financial stability, and global power dynamics simultaneously, then the conflict itself becomes more than a regional issue. It becomes a reflection of how the current world order responds to pressure. And that may be the deeper story behind what we are witnessing today.